AJ here with a brand new video review. As you can see, I have in front of you a steelcore with his head next to his head, or his neck. Here's the traditional steelcore head that comes with the Fansproject core exclusive steelcore. It's a nice looking head, kind of has a prime vibe, but let's be serious, to most of us this is not a prime toy. We don't use it as a prime, so the head is always kind of looked out of place. More specifically, in a lot of instances, the body looks similar to a more modern interpretation of, say, the Unicron Trilogy Ultra Magnus, or I believe Overload is the name. But it's a nice looking figure on its own. But because of that recollection, the guy over at Renderform has begun manufacturing new heads for the toy. And he has technically two different head sculpts in several different releases. You have the Iron Magnum, which is more of your brute head design. The Steel Magnum, which is more of your traditional face, which is probably actually, out of the two regular releases, my preferable one. And then an exclusive that we'll get into in a minute. So your basic concept of what you do. We'll start off. Make sure you have your, not necessary, but I do feel like it adds to the effect. Have your core of choice in. For most of this review, because the heads are designed to go with the regular release, I'm going to be using the traditional steel one. And we plug it in. There's the toy. So head-wise, in both sculpts, you have two color choices. You have gray with a blue face. As you can see, there's yellow light piping and a black head crest. It's just a very nice looking, subtle figure. A lot of molded in detail, especially when you factor in Renderform makes each one of these by hand. It's sculpted by him, designed by him, cast by him, assembled by him, painted by him, etc. One guy. That's fairly impressive. And then you also have it with a blue base for the bulk of the head, green light piping, and silver face. So I'm going to actually start off with the head that I probably like the least out of them all. Not saying any of them are bad, but my personal preferences, I'm not a huge fan of the way, and it's not even the head sculpts issue, it's more of the coloring. So it's basically alternate. So take your figure, pop the head on, and there you have it. Now, as you can see, it gives him a much more brutish looking form, and the head has a little more bulk to it. Same size and scale, but just a more bulky looking menacing head. And now the reason this is probably my least favorite head is not that I don't like it, it's just a lot of gray going on. And it really just kind of mutes the figure. Compared to the other ones, either of the gray heads just kind of ended up somewhat muted on the body. But it still looks nice, still gives you that real brute vibe. Get a close-up on him. You can see it's just a really nice looking head sculpt. The colors match pretty well perfectly, which is just a nice thing considering it's a handmade product. So pop that head off. Just briefly pop the blue one on of the Iron Magnum. And you get a nice view of that one too. There's something about the silver, metallic silver under the blue that really pops with this design for me. So that is why this is my for me, the preferential head color selection, but not the preferential head design. If you're putting him with a Wreckers motif, actually I would recommend this one over the other ones because it does give it a very good Wreckers vibe. Then you have the same head the steel Magnum has a much less pronounced chin, so you get a nice view of the head sculpting, the metallic blue. My cat's knocking the tripod around, and just looks nice. Now I'm going to skip over the gray. It matches nicely, but again, like I said, I'm not a huge fan of the actual color combination. If you're going with one of the more mass releases, this is actually the one that I recommend the most, and it's the steel Magnum blue. As you can see, he's got a really nice color contrast. The blue pretty much matches spot on to the actual figure. The silver highlights very nicely. He's got a very nice sculpted in mouth that you can, let's see if I can get in close enough that you can kind of see. The light piping, even just going by the light bouncing off the back of my wall, is pretty well done. And it's just a nice looking figure if you're going for one of the more mass release heads, especially if you're matching it with the traditional core. I do actually recommend this head the most out of all of them. That said, if you're not using the traditional core, no matter what, the chest always looks like it's kind of out of place. The traditional core, yes, it's a lighter blue, but it still kind of has that amalgamation flow. If you ordered the Fansproject core subscription, you got a trailer to house a bunch of cores, and then you got this guy. So we'll get him transformed quick. I probably won't do a review on just him anytime soon, so just fair warning. But it looks kind of out of place. Which leads us to the more or less produced run of the Red Sentinel. Now the Red Sentinel is a limited of 50 run, and it's designed to go with the red core. It uses the Iron Magnum head sculpt, and yes, I realize I said I wasn't a fan of that head sculpt, but we're going to get, well, it's not even so much the sculpt, it's I prefer the one with the face, but we're going to get into that in a moment. So there is the Red Sentinel. Now, just go ahead and pop him on. Now again, not the biggest fan. I do prefer the other design, the Steel Magnum design, but this is probably my favorite of the color combinations. I really like that if you have the core in this situation, you can match the head so the body doesn't seem, I mean, you still have a body that's, you know, a very different color pattern, but it feels like it's tied in better. Now this head is more expensive and it's also limited more, but you also get another weapon with it, and that is you get one of Renderform's lion swords. I believe this design was initially used for last year's BotCon, one of the Knights vs. Pirates set. It's got a very nicely sculpted lion head. Now it's done in kind of a metallic maroon. I like the color. As its standalone item, it's probably the only thing that wasn't a huge thing for me with this release, and that's just mainly because the sword isn't colored the same as the rest of the figure. Additionally, my sword is a little tight in a 5mm peg hole, so you may have to wiggle it a little bit. I'm probably going to end up just sanding mine down just a hair, just so it slides in and out. I mean, it's even out of color, it still looks nice. I like having him wield a sword. All in all, well worth it. Now, just to touch on something, because again, as many of you know, orders went live for this in October, and a lot of people are just now getting some of theirs. Because it is one guy, and he hand assembles every piece, hand paints, etc. It's basically getting a custom piece for everyone you order. I want to actually throw a shout out to him for what he's been doing. To anybody who ordered, he's been including some kind, that's getting their order late, he's been including some kind of free gift. In my case, I got 2 guns. One of them is assault rifle looking gun, and then a clear orange laser, both of which huge fan of. Haven't figured out which figure they're going to go with, but I definitely like the way they look. And then in addition to that, he was doing, if you're like him on Facebook, late orders, he was doing contests where he posted a picture, and the first one to reply won that item. So, for example, I won a set of missiles for Classic Ravage. I don't actually have a Classic Ravage, but I'm planning on repainting them, and just to give you an idea of how they look. Gives them the G1 rockets. So I want to thank him very much for, you know, doing the contests and trying to give something, because he was worried about being late. If you're getting antsy because he's late, don't. He's just he'll respond if you message him. He's a good business person, and he's just trying to make things right. Plus, it's a lot of kits for one guy. I do recommend going to his website, which there's going to be a link below, and ordering at least one, because if you have steelcore, it definitely completes the look of him to have his own head instead of a Primish one. Hope you guys have a good rest of your day.